The human psyche contains countless things that were never acquired. The human mind is not born as a tabula rasa. You know that quiet ache you carry, the one you don't talk about because you can't explain it, that strange feeling that something is missing, even when everything in your life looks fine from the outside. Maybe you built a career, a family, a routine, and yet there's a space inside you that never fills. A kind of homesickness for a place you've never visited. A longing for something you can't name. A whisper that says, "There's more, but I don't know what it is." Most people try to silence that whisper. They blame stress, fatigue, or disappointment. But what if the emptiness you feel isn't a flaw? What if it isn't depression or failure or a sign that your life is off track? What if the reason nothing here fully satisfies you is because the thing you're missing didn't begin here? What if the ache is older than your memories, deeper than your personality, and far more ancient than your biography? Carl Jung believed that the deepest layers of your being did not start with your birth. He wrote that the psyche is part of nature, and its enigma is as infinite as nature itself. And if that's verdade, if your psyche isn't limited to the story that started when you were born, then the emptiness you feel might be a trace of something your conscious mind has forgotten, but your soul still remembers. Think of it like this. Imagine waking up in a room you've never seen before, but somehow every part of it feels familiar. The way the light falls, the shape of the door, the silence between the walls. You can't explain why, but your body knows it. Your heart knows it. Something in you recognizes a place you've never consciously been. That is the mystery Jung invites us to explore. Not a literal location, but an inner landscape, a symbolic origin, the psychological womb for which your consciousness emerged. And maybe that explains why some people arrive in this world with irrational fears that have no cause, or passions that burn without explanation, or talents that feel inherited from nowhere. Why certain relationships feel like reunions, and certain decisions feel like echoes. Why you sometimes sense that your life is not beginning, but continuing. In Jung's view, before the ego, the I you identify with, there was a vast field of psychic life already moving, breathing, and shaping you. A reservoir of images, instincts, memories of the human spirit. And it's from this field that your soul rises, like a flame emerging from an ancient fire. That means the question, where was your soul before you were born, isn't mystical poetry. It's a doorway into understanding why you feel the way you feel, why you repeat certain patterns, why you are drawn to certain people, why you fear things you've never lived, and why you long for things you can't name. But before we talk about that place, before we uncover what Jung really meant by the life of the psyche that precedes your conscious identity, before we explore the roots of déjà-vu, sudden callings, and those unexplainable interpoles, you need to understand something far more immediate. There's a part of you living right now that was not created by your experiences, your childhood, or your choices. It moves beneath your thoughts. It breathes beneath your reactions. It whispers in your dreams and stirs in your instincts. And if you want to discover where your soul was before this life, first, you must understand where the unseen parts of you come from and why they keep calling you back to a place you don't remember, yet somehow have never forgotten. You entered this world at a specific moment. A doctor announced your time of birth. Someone wrapped you in a blanket, and your ego, your sense of I, slowly began forming. You learned your name. You learned what people expected of you. You learned who you were allowed to be. But Jung teaches something profound. The ego is not the beginning of your story. It is only the beginning of your awareness. Beneath the small island of your conscious life lies a vast continent you did not build, but inherited. Jung called this deeper layer the collective unconscious, a psychic foundation older than your body, older than your memories, older than your family line. Not a storehouse of personal events, but a living structure of instincts, images, patterns, and emotional truths shared by every human being who has ever existed. Jung wrote, "The unconscious contains all the inherited functional traces that form the structure of the human mind." In other words, before you learn to speak, to fear, to desire, or to dream, the blueprint of all these capacities was already inside you, waiting. To see how this works, imagine a young man Jung once encountered. He had grown up far from the ocean, surrounded only by fields and mountains. He had never touched the sea, never smelled salt in the air, never seen a wave rise or collapse. Yet from the time he was a child, He carried a terror so deep that even the sound of moving water made him freeze. His parents couldn't explain it. He couldn't explain it. No one had frightened him. No story had marked him. Nothing in his life pointed to a cause. In analysis, Jung realized the fear had nothing to do with the young man's personal history. It wasn't about water at all. It was symbolic. The sea, limitless, unpredictable, devouring, was one of humanity's oldest images for the unconscious itself. The boy wasn't afraid of drowning in an ocean he had never seen. He was afraid of drowning in the inner ocean he already carried. His terror was an inherited memory, a universal image that countless humans had felt long before he was born. It belonged not to his ego, but to the ancient psyche beneath it. And maybe this is where your own story starts to echo his. What unexplained fears live inside you? What emotions rise in your body before your mind can make sense of them? Why do some dreams feel older than your life? Why does certain music feel like a place you once lived in? Why do you sometimes walk into a room and feel as if you're remembering it instead of seeing it for the first time? And what about your gifts? Why do some people sit at a piano and play as if remembering rather than learning? Why does writing feel natural for some, or healing others, or guiding strangers? Why do certain life paths call you repeatedly, even when you run from them? If the ego were all you are, none of this would make sense. But if your psyche is rooted in something older, something not born with your body but carried into it, then the patterns inside you begin to reveal a much deeper truth. So where does this leave us? If your ego is only the surface, if your fears, longings, intuitions, and talents come from a layer that predates your birth, then what does that say about where your soul was before it arrived here? To understand that, we need to reveal something even more hidden. The inner mechanism quietly shaping your emotions, your attractions, your impulses, and even your destiny. A mechanism working inside you right now. Even as you listen, there are moments in your life that make no logical sense, yet feel absolutely true. You walk into a city you've never visited, and something inside you softens, as if your chest recognizes the streets before your eyes do. Or you meet a stranger and feel an instant familiarity, trust, comfort, or even a mysterious pull that no explanation fully captures. And then there are those abilities that appear without effort, as if you're remembering instead of learning. Writing that pours out of you, music that flows through your hands, intuition that feels like quiet certainty. Jung believed these experiences are not accidents. They are expressions of material that existed long before your ego began shaping your identity. They rise from the collective unconscious, the ancient architecture behind your personal story, emerging in subtle ways. In the places that call you, the people who awaken you, the dreams that feel like memories instead of inventions. Some dreams carry landscapes you've never seen, symbols you've never studied, emotions you've never lived. And yet, when you wake up, they feel more familiar than your own name. Think about your values too. That deep sense of justice you had even as a child. The instinct to protect, to create, to heal, to explore. Who taught you that? When did you learn it? Many of these impulses were already inside you before you took your first breath. Jung described this as material anterior ego, psychic structures that guide your development long before your conscious mind begins forming choices. He wrote, O inconscient condum tambum components que in neo alcancarem o limir de conscientia, constituum as sementes de futuros contudos conscientis. These psychic seeds don't appear from nowhere. They are inherited potentials, ancient patterns, and timeless instincts waiting for the right conditions to grow. If your consciousness begins only at birth, but your inner architecture includes seeds planted long before that moment, then your soul does not enter the world as a blank page. It arrives already carrying the outline of a story. This is why you sometimes feel drawn to particular eras of history, to certain myths, to specific art or music that feels like home. It's why you can feel a bond with someone you've known for minutes, while remaining distant from people you've known for years. It's why certain fears tighten your chest without any event in your past to justify them. And it's why the life you're living now sometimes feels like a continuation, like the next chapter is something that began far earlier than you can consciously remember. But here's the part Jung insisted we must understand. These seeds do not remain silent. They push upward. They seek expression. They try to break through the surface of your life in the form of dreams, impulses, synchronicities, crises, and powerful emotions that seem to erupt out of nowhere. They are not trying to disrupt you. They are trying to complete you. And when you ignore them, repress them, or pretend they don't exist, they don't vanish. They change form. They grow in the dark. They press against the walls of your consciousness until the pressure becomes unbearable. This is why some people feel lost even when everything in their life is right. Why anxiety appears without explanation. Why a career that makes sense on paper still feels hollow. The seeds of the psyche will not be silenced simply because your ego is uncomfortable with their message. Jung warned repeatedly that the cost of ignoring these inner forces is far higher than most people imagine, because if you don't turn toward these seeds, they will turn toward you. And the way they rise might not be gentle. But what does all this reveal about where your soul was before you were born, and what it came here trying to finish? To understand that, we need to look at the price of resisting what your inner life is trying to awaken, and why Jung believed this resistance can shape or shatter your destiny. There comes a moment in a person's life when the distance between who they are and who they were meant to become grows so wide that something inside begins to collapse. You don't notice it at first. It starts quietly, like a soft dimming of inner light. You wake up and feel nothing. You go to work and feel nothing. You sit with people you love and still feel nothing. It isn't sadness. It isn't depression. It's a kind of emptiness that echoes from a place deeper than emotion, a silence created by living cut off from the oldest parts of yourself. When someone becomes disconnected from their inner origin, the ancient psyche beneath the ego, life begins to lose its texture. Meaning thins out. Choices feel random. You start chasing anything that promises to fill the hole. Relationships, approval, success, distraction. You cling to people not because of love, but because the silence inside terrifies you. You crave validation the way a starving body craves sugar, desperate for something, anything, that offers temporary relief. And then there are the patterns. The same heartbreak, repeating with different faces. The same self-betrayal wearing new disguises. The same mistakes. So predictable, you could almost narrate them as they unfold. You watch yourself move toward the very thing that wounds you, yet you can't stop. It's like being pulled by a current you didn't choose, one that follows a script written far below the surface. Without connection to the deeper psyche, you become a creature of repetition instead of transformation. Slowly, identity begins to dissolve. You forget what you love, what you want, what makes you feel alive. Instead, you shape yourself around whatever the world demands. You become reactive instead of creative, exhausted instead of inspired. The inner compass that once pointed toward meaning begins to spin aimlessly, and without realizing it, you start calling this confusion your destiny. Jung often warned that this disconnection from the self, the inner nucleus of the soul, creates what he called doenkas de alma. Illness is not a body, but a spirit. When the ego drifts too far from its source, it becomes hollow, brittle, and easily shattered. And crises inevitably come. Sometimes gently, sometimes violently. A breakup that breaks more than your heart. A job loss that feels like losing yourself. A sudden panic that surges out of nowhere. Or that heavy existential question rising late at night. Why am I here? Why does my life feel like someone else's story? These crises are not punishments. They are signals. The psyche tries to wake you. It tries to pull you back. But when you don't understand the message, the crises only intensify. Living disconnected from your inner origin is like walking through vast internal landscapes with a broken compass. Lost, disoriented, mistaking confusion for fate, and exhaustion for truth. You wander through deserts that were never meant to be your home, carrying a thirst you cannot name. The tragedy is that most people never realize the path they're walking is not the one their soul chose. It's the one their unconscious patterns dragged them into. But Jung never stopped at tragedy. He believed that what breaks you is also what calls you. That crises are invitations. That emptiness is a doorway. And that the same unconscious forces that destabilize your life can also restore it, if you learn how to meet them consciously. Because Jung did discover something, a way back to the self, a way to recover the ancient memory your soul carries, the one that existed long before your ego learned your name. And it's in the next block that this map finally starts to appear. There comes a moment when the ache inside you stops feeling like a problem and starts feeling like a calling. That's the moment the Jungian path begins. Jung didn't see healing as fixing yourself, but as a journey of returning to the place where your soul remembers who you are. It isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming someone ancient, someone original, someone whole. And every journey return follows the same rhythm: recognition, integration, action, and legacy, for movements that slowly realign you with the self. The first step is recognition. This is the moment you stop brushing off your dreams as nonsense, your impulses as mistakes, your intuition as irrational. You begin to see that the symbols rising from within you are not random. They're messages from the deeper psyche, seeds pushing toward the light. Recognition is simply learning to listen, and it's gentler than people think. A single microaction can open the door. Spend 7 days writing down your dreams, even if they make no sense. Over time, patterns emerge. A color repeats. A figure returns. A place feels familiar. Suddenly, the unconscious isn't a mystery, it's a conversation. The second step is integration, the moment when those symbols start asking for your participation. This is where the shadows appear. Old fears, unclaimed strengths, emotions you've avoided for years, maybe even instincts that feel older than your biography. Integration doesn't demand perfection. It asks for honesty. It invites you to sit with what you've refused to feel. A simple microaction can begin this process. Write one question on paper. What am I avoiding feeling right now? And let your hand answer without censoring. Sometimes the truth rises slowly. Sometimes it rushes out, but it always knows the way. Then comes conscious action. This is where transformation stops being poetic and starts becoming practical. The unconscious will always try to push its impulses through you, but now you learn to pause before reacting. You create space between the instinct and the behavior. Jung believed this pause is where the ego and the self finally meet. It's not a grand gesture. It's tiny, consistent choices. The microaction here is deceptively simple. Practice a 10-second pause before responding in any emotional conflict. 10 seconds is enough to shift you from reaction to intention, from repetition to creation, from the past to present. And finally, there is legacy. Jung believed the true mark of individuation is living not as an echo of your past, but as an expression of your soul's deepest values. Legacy is not fame or achievement. It is alignment. It is walking through the world in a way that leaves a trail of authenticity behind you. To cultivate this, choose one small action each week aligned with a value that feels most ancient inside you. Compassion, courage, truth, creativity, freedom. Not a performance, not a goal, just alignment. A way of keeping your inner compass calibrated to the self. These 4 movements, recognition, integration, conscious action, legacy, form a map, not a rigid path, but living, breathing guide that shifts as you shift. And when you follow it, the emptiness inside begins to fill not with noise, but with meaning. You start recognizing yourself again. Choices become clearer. Relationships become more grounded. Life stops feeling like something that happens to you and starts becoming something that rises from within you. But for all its beauty, this journey is not without danger. Jung warned that there are traps, subtle, seductive, and deeply rooted, that can sabotage everything, pulling you back into the very patterns you're trying to escape. And some of these traps, he believed, are among the most serious threats to the soul. Every true path of inner awakening attracts not only clarity, but danger. Jung understood something most people ignore. The closer you walk toward your own soul, the more your ego tries to protect its old territory. And it does this through subtle forms of sabotage, forms so convincing that they often look like growth, when in reality they're pulling you away from the very transformation you're trying to reach. The first trap is ego inflation. This is what happens when someone mistakes intuition for superiority or symbolic insight for special status. Instead of becoming more human, more grounded, more whole, the ego expands like hot air in a balloon. Suddenly, every dream becomes a prophecy, every fear becomes a sign, every impulse becomes a calling. Jung warned about this constantly. When the ego absorbs the power of the unconscious instead of dialoguing with it, The person becomes swollen with a sense of uniqueness that isolates rather than liberates. What began as a return to the soul becomes a performance of spiritual grandiosity. The second trap is spiritual isolation. After discovering the richness of the inner world, some people retreat into it entirely. They begin to believe that all answers exist within, forgetting that life requires participation, friction, and relationship. Growth becomes escape. Silence becomes avoidance. Introspection becomes hiding. Jung believed the psyche needs both worlds, the inner and the outer, because the self expresses itself not only in symbols and dreams, but also in conversations, conflicts, responsibilities, and the simple act of being part of humanity. When someone pulls too far inward, they lose the grounding that makes transformation sustainable. Then comes the savior complex, one of the most seductive traps. Once you begin to access deeper meaning, it's easy to believe your mission is to fix others, heal others, awaken others. It feels noble, but it's actually a way of avoiding your own unfinished work. Jung observed that people often project their unclaimed wounds into the lives of those they try to rescue. The desire to save becomes a detour from the harder task of healing yourself. And the tragedy is that many burn out trying to hold light for others while their own inner flame quietly collapses. The fourth trap is regression. The silent pull back into old patterns the moment the new path becomes uncomfortable. The unconscious may open doors for you, but walking through them requires courage. Many people step forward until the unfamiliar feels too raw, too exposed, too real, and then they retreat. They tell themselves they were overthinking, or that life was simple before, but deep down they know the truth. The new self felt too alive, too honest, too different from the identity they learned to perform. Regression is not failure. It is fear disguised as familiarity. These traps share one thing in common. They distort the journey. They cloud the path with fog, where you see either too much or too little. Jung often compared individuation to climbing a mountain covered in mist. You don't fall because the mountain is dangerous. You fall because you become overconfident. You underestimate the terrain. You look down at the valley you left instead of the step. In front of you, in this fog, the smallest misstep can send you sliding back into the old life you fought so hard to leave behind. But here's the truth Jung returned to again and again. These traps do not exist to stop you. They exist to mature you. They teach discernment, humility, patience, and the ability to walk slowly even when the summit calls urgently. And when you learn to move through them with awareness, something remarkable begins to happen. The old patterns lose their power. The ego softens. The inner compass realigns. The fog begins to thin, revealing not a final destination, but a new horizon inside you. And on that horizon is something Jung considered one of the greatest mysteries of the psyche, the quiet, radiant moment when the self begins to be reborn. There comes a moment on the journey when the inner landscape shifts. It doesn't happen with fireworks or revelation, but with a quiet recognition that feels older than thought. You begin to notice that the fears you carried no longer hold the same weight, that the dreams returning night after night no longer confuse you, that the inner voices you once ignored now sound like guidance instead of noise. Something inside you reorganizes itself. The chaos begins to form patterns. The shadows you fear become companions. And the light you idealize becomes something you can finally touch. This is the moment Jung called a return to the self, the inner center that existed before your ego, before your biography, before the layers of identity the world placed on you. When you integrate the light you love and the shadow you avoid, you begin to feel a strange familiarity with yourself, as if meeting someone you once knew deeply but forgot somewhere along the way. It isn't a literal memory of a past life. It's older than that. It is a recognition of a truth your soul carried long before you entered this world. You were never incomplete. You were never lost. You were never separate from your origin. You had simply forgotten how to listen. And in that recognition, life begins to move differently. You stop forcing your path and start following it. You stop interpreting synchronicities as coincidences and begin seeing them as the language of the deeper psyche guiding your steps. You stop searching for meaning outside and begin discovering that meaning rises naturally from within you when you align with the self. Jung believed that this alignment is a true form of awakening, not an escape from reality, but a deeper participation in it. The world does not change. You change the way you move through it. You stop living as if life is happening to you and begin living as if life is happening through you. It feels like coming home, but not to a place, to a center, a pulse, a truth. The moment you stop fighting your inner world and begin collaborating with it, the old conflicts soften, choices become clearer. The fog that once covered your purpose begins to lift. You no longer cling to relationships out of fear, or careers out of obligation, or to identities out of habit. You begin to choose what resonates with the deepest part of you, what feels like recognition, not pressure. And slowly, the emptiness that once felt like a wound begins to feel like space. Space for creation, space for alignment, space for your soul to breathe again. This inner shift is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a new one, a journey where you carry your own light instead of searching for someone else's, where you walk with clarity instead of confusion, where the symbols in your dreams become companions instead of puzzles, where your past stops defining you and begins informing you, where your patterns stop imprisoning you and start revealing what you came here to heal. And all of this leads to the moment when you finally understand that the self was never something you had to find. It was always waiting for you beneath the noise of your life. It is like diving into a dark lake, uncertain, trembling, unsure what lies below, only to rise back to the surface, holding a flame that was never lost, a flame that belongs to you, a flame that was lit long before you took your first breath. Your soul always knew the way. Now you remember. Comment below. I choose to remember who I am.